The Valley of Mexico, bathed in the high Mesoamerican sun, was the stage upon which the greatest urban drama of the classic period unfolded. Here, between the 2nd and 5th centuries CE, rose Teotihuacan, a city whose name the later Aztecs would assign with a religious awe, Teotihuacan, the place where the gods were born. Its scale was breathtaking, its organization unprecedented. At its zenith, Teotihuacan was not merely a city, but a thriving, pulsing megalopolis, rivaling the largest centers of the Old World, sustaining a population estimated conservatively between 100,000 and 150,000 inhabitants. The city's architecture was a geometric manifestation of cosmological order. Its heart was the Avenue of the Dead, a monumental, wide thoroughfare running precisely north-south, flanked by the residential, administrative, and sacred architecture that defined the civic space. Dominating this axis were the iconic structures that spoke to the city's spiritual and temporal power: the massive, base-heavy Pyramid of the Sun, the slightly smaller but equally imposing Pyramid of the Moon, and the meticulously decorated Temple of the Feathered Serpent, Quetzalcoatl. The sheer size of these structures required a labor force and managerial precision that testified to the centralized power of the state. Teotihuacan was a marvel of urban planning unmatched in ancient Mesoamerica. Its layout was governed by a strict grid system, creating a sense of ordered permanence. This planning extended to advanced infrastructure, including sophisticated drainage and water systems essential for maintaining hygiene and providing potable water to the vast population, preventing the urban collapse seen in less managed centers. Furthermore, the city was characterized by a distinct social policy: the creation of multi-ethnic neighborhoods. These barrios housed immigrant groups from across the Teotihuacano sphere of influence: Oaxacan's Gulf Coast, Peoples, and possibly Maya, a testament to the city's magnetic cultural and economic pull and its ability to integrate diverse populations, albeit under its rigid imperial structure. The city's power was projected far beyond the Valley of Mexico. Teotihuacan exerted a wide political, cultural, and economic influence across Mesoamerica. Its distinctive architectural styles, ceramics, particularly the thin orange ware, and state ideology, often incorporating militaristic imagery, were found as far away as the Maya lowlands. Notably in centers like Tikal, where Teotihuacano presence is linked to dynastic changes and military intervention. This vast network ensured a constant flow of exotic goods, tribute, and raw materials necessary to sustain the urban behemoth. The stability of the Teotihuacano state rested on a highly defined, almost immutable social and political structure. At the apex sat a powerful, tightly controlled religious and military elite. The rulers were shrouded in priestly authority, their temporal power intrinsically linked to the state cult. The powerful deities, the sun, the fierce yet life-giving rain god, Tlaloc, and the mystical feathered serpent, Quetzalcoatl, were not just revered, they were actively manipulated to reinforce the divine mandate of the ruling class. Their ritual cycles, often involving grand public ceremonies and possibly human sacrifice, as evidenced at the Temple of the Feathered Serpent, served as crucial mechanisms for social cohesion and the display of absolute power. The economy that fueled this immense political superstructure was multifaceted. While a massive portion of the populace was engaged in intensive agriculture in the surrounding valley, utilizing Chinampa-like techniques and irrigation, the true engine of wealth and power lay in trade and, most critically, the control of obsidian. This volcanic glass, superior for sharp tools and weapons, was sourced from mines the state strictly regulated, such as those in the nearby Sierra de las Navajas. Teotihuacan's domination of the production, distribution, and trade of obsidian provided it with unparalleled leverage over its neighbors and cemented its position as the economic hegemon of central Mexico. Society was rigidly stratified. The priests and nobles enjoyed lavish lifestyles, inhabiting large, multi-room, decorated palaces, often adorned with murals depicting Tlaloc and the feathered serpent. In stark contrast, the vast majority of citizens, the artisans, farmers, and laborers, lived in standardized, centrally managed apartment compounds. While these provided organized, multifamily housing, the uniformity and lack of individual expression in these quarters contrasted sharply with the elite spaces, embodying the inherent inequality of the state. By the 5th and 6th centuries CE, however, this intricately balanced system began to show signs of profound stress. Archaeological evidence from the later centuries reveals a growing crisis of sustainability and governance. Indicators of growing social tension and economic inequality become more pronounced in the material record. The commoner compounds, while still uniform, occasionally show signs of neglect or poor repair, while the wealth of the elite may have remained conspicuously concentrated. This imbalance likely led to a weakening of the state's popular legitimacy and foreshadowed political instability. Compounding the social strain was the economic fragility. The control of obsidian, the very lifeblood of the Teotihuacano economy, was faltering. Geochemical studies analyzing the distribution of obsidian wares confirm a marked and catastrophic decline in the obsidian trade after Saidaichi, more 550 CE. This commercial contraction was not merely a recession, it represented a systemic breakdown in the city's ability to provision itself, maintain its economic hegemony, and pay for the extensive public works and tributes that kept the political system functioning. Whether this was caused by competing routes, the rise of powerful regional rivals intercepting trade, or internal production issues is debated, but the effect was devastating. An economic collapse that starved the city of its primary source of wealth and leverage. The internal pressures, starvation of wealth, resentment over inequality, and potential environmental stress related to population density created a volatile mix, pushing the vast organized machinery of the state toward a breaking point. The final decisive blow to Teotihuacan was delivered not by the slow, inexorable decay of time, but by a sudden, intense explosion of violence. Around the period of 550–650 CE, the archaeological record is dominated by evidence of widespread fires and intentional destruction concentrated in the most significant areas of the ceremonial and administrative centers. The pattern of destruction is critical for understanding the collapse. Temples, palaces, and government complexes, the physical manifestations of elite power and state ideology, were systematically and deliberately burned. Excavations, particularly in high-status areas like the Palace of the Jaguars, reveal clear signs of fire and violent upheaval directed against the ruling classes living in governing spaces. Conversely, the vast residential districts occupied by the common populace remained mostly untouched. This selective pattern strongly indicates that the destruction was likely an internal uprising rather than a foreign invasion. Had a rival army conquered the city, one would expect evidence of widespread looting, slaughter, and the burning of residential areas to terrorize the populace or secure resources. Instead, the evidence points to a focused act of rebellion, the lower classes rising up to overthrow and symbolically obliterate the ruling elite and the institutions of their oppressive control. No evidence of total civilian massacre has been found, lending powerful support to the internal revolt theory. The fires were thus not random acts of vandalism, but the terminal act of a revolutionary moment. Growing inequality and resource shortages were the probable underlying drivers that propelled the lower classes to violently rebel against the ruling power structure. While the evidence for internal revolt is compelling, historians and archaeologists continue to debate the ultimate causes, viewing the collapse through several lenses. 1. Internal revolt. This remains the leading theory. The concentration of fires in elite and religious buildings is the primary physical evidence. It suggests a scenario where mounting inequality, economic decline, as evidenced by the obsidian trade drop, and potentially resource or food scarcity drove the commoners to rebellion. The lower classes, armed with resentment, systematically dismantled the symbols of power and the homes of those who had benefited from their labor. 2. External invasion. Some scholars still consider the possibility of a military attack. Evidence of weapons and localized conflict could suggest an attack by neighboring, increasingly powerful groups, possibly the Totonacs from the Gulf Coast or the semi-nomadic northern Chichimek tribes. This theory posits that the power vacuum created by internal weakness made the city an easy target for foreign conquest. However, this view struggles to account for the highly selective nature of the burning. 3. Religious transformation. The deliberate burning of temples is sometimes interpreted as more than just anti-elite violence. It might symbolize a profound religious reform or rejection of the old gods. Some scholars propose that a massive ideological change, perhaps a revolt against the increasingly militaristic cults of Tlaloc and Quetzalcoatl, led to internal conflict. The destruction was the rejection of a sacred contract that the populace felt the elite had failed to uphold, a necessary spiritual cleansing leading to the city's eventual abandonment. What is certain is that after the devastating fires, the city's ability to function was crippled. The population declined rapidly, and by approximately 700 CE, Teotihuacan, the grandest city in the Americas, was largely abandoned, its monuments left as silent testaments to a lost age. The immediate consequence of the collapse of Teotihuacan was the rapid fragmentation of political power in central Mexico. The centralized authority that had managed trade, military affairs, and religion across a vast region vanished, initiating a period of political turbulence and decentralization. The region entered the post-Teotihuacan period, characterized by smaller, powerful, fortified city-states known as epiclassic centers, such as Cacaxtla and Xochicalco, which quickly filled the political void. These new regional powers later served as the precursors to the Toltec civilization and, centuries later, the Aztec Empire. Crucially, Teotihuacan's cultural and religious legacy endured. Even in ruin, the city became a spiritual anchor for subsequent Mesoamerican civilizations. The Aztecs, hundreds of years later, treated the monumental site with reverence, incorporating its architecture and pantheon into their own cosmology. Their name for the city, the place where gods were born, was an acknowledgement that their own world was founded on the ruins and the concepts pioneered there. Teotihuacano urban planning, its deities, like Tlaloc, and its iconographic style continue to influence the art, architecture, and religion of the entire region. Thus, to construct a coherent historical narrative of Teotihuacan's end, one must meticulously combine these factual layers. First, describing the breathtaking scale and complex social order of the imperial peak. Second, tracing the hidden signs of internal strain, the crippling economic failure, and the rising social inequality. Third, recounting the terrifying targeted finale, the burning of the temples and palaces as an act of popular rebellion. And finally, concluding with the powerful, lingering legacy, the understanding that while its political power ended in fire, its spiritual and architectural model shaped central Mexico for the subsequent millennium.